The sun had just begun to rise over the horizon, casting a soft golden glow across Earth's most secretive military compound. The world's attention was focused on this place as a strange event unfolded. A sleek alien ship, shaped like a massive silver teardrop, hovered just above the ground. It was unlike anything humanity had ever seen, smooth, shining, and graceful, with an almost ethereal presence. The air buzzed with excitement, confusion, and fear. After years of radio signals and research, the humans had finally made contact with an alien race. The world held its breath. Inside the compound, the military and top scientists from every corner of the globe were gathered, prepared for the first official meeting with the Valkar. The Valkar were known across the galaxy as one of the most intelligent and technologically advanced species in existence. But even more than that, they had been watching Earth for centuries, fascinated by humanity's ability to adapt and survive in ways that no other species had. Their visit, however, had a specific purpose, one that would change the course of history. Among the crew of the Valkar ship was a young diplomat named Lyra. She was a geneticist, highly trained in the science of life and reproduction, and she had been chosen for this mission because of her expertise. Lyra had always been fascinated by the diversity of life across the galaxy, but humanity intrigued her more than any other species. The Valkar had spent years studying Earth's radio waves and what they had discovered about humans, particularly their genetic resilience, was nothing short of remarkable. Lyra stepped off the ship with a mixture of awe and curiosity. The soft, alien light of the ship illuminated her slender, blue-skinned form as she walked down the ramp. She wore a silver uniform that shimmered in the sunlight, and her large, dark eyes scanned the human faces before her. She was beautiful by Valkar standards, but her beauty was an expression of the cold logic and genetic perfection her species cherished. Her mission, however, was not to simply admire humans. She was here to understand their genetics, why they had evolved the way they had, and most importantly, to study their methods of reproduction. As she stood in front of the gathered humans, the leader of the military contingent, General Thomas Clark, stepped forward to greet her. He extended a hand, and though it felt strange, Lyra returned the gesture, her fingers brushing against his in the first human touch she had ever experienced. "Welcome to Earth, Lyra," General Clark said, his voice full of both pride and nervousness. "We're honored by your presence." Lyra nodded slightly, her expression unreadable. "Thank you. I look forward to studying your species." The human scientists had set up a series of briefings, and Lyra wasted no time in getting to work. The humans had been waiting for this moment for years, and they were eager to show her everything they had. They started with a tour of their research facilities, guiding Lyra through the complex rooms filled with data, machines, and humans working together in harmony. She could sense the excitement in the air as the human scientists, like eager students, presented their findings. Dr. Elena Hartfield, one of Earth's leading geneticists, was chosen to guide Lyra through the most important parts of the human genome. She was tall and confident, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through Lyra. "We've spent years studying the human genetic code," Dr. Hartfield explained, pointing to a glowing screen that displayed the intricate patterns of human DNA. "We discovered that, despite our apparent weakness and vulnerability, humans possess an incredible ability to adapt to nearly any environment. Our genetic makeup allows us to survive in the harshest conditions, whether on Earth or beyond." Lyra's eyes narrowed as she observed the data. "Impressive," she said, her voice cool and detached. "But I'm more interested in your methods of reproduction. Our species finds it fascinating. Your methods." Dr. Hartfield smiled at the comment. "Humans have evolved a variety of ways to ensure survival. It's not just about survival of the fittest, it's about adaptability, the bond between individuals, and the strength of our social structures. Our methods of reproduction reflect that." Lyra's interest piqued. The Valkar had no need for love, affection, or even intimacy in their reproductive processes. They relied on advanced technologies to select for desirable traits and ensure genetic purity. But humans, it seemed, had a different approach. They had developed emotional connections, ties between parents, children, and entire communities that influenced the very act of reproduction. As Lyra continued to absorb the information, she felt a strange stirring inside her. She had been trained to think of genetics as cold, logical, and perfect. But the humans had something more. A wild, unpredictable, emotional force that Lyra could not quite grasp. She watched as Dr. Hartfield spoke about the joy and the struggles that came with human reproduction, the deep bonds that tied parents to their children, and the sacrifices that were made for the survival of the species. For the first time, Lyra wondered if there was more to life than just logic. And though she did not know it yet, this was the beginning of her deepening confusion and fascination with the humans she had come to study. Lyra's mind was racing as she left the genetics lab. The human scientists had shown her the complexity of their genetic systems, but it was not the science that troubled her. It was the emotional weight behind it all. She had studied the data with detached curiosity, but now, walking through the corridors of the research facility, she couldn't help but feel something new. The air seemed to hum with the energy of something she had never encountered before, human emotions. As she passed humans working together, she noticed how they laughed, shared stories, and supported one another. There was something about them that seemed unpredictable. In the Valkar way of life, emotions were suppressed. Feelings like love, anger, or sadness were considered distractions, something to be controlled. Everything was about precision, logic, and planning. So why were these humans so open with their feelings? Why did they care so much for one another? Dr. Hartfield, noticing Lyra's distracted state, spoke softly beside her. "You're still adjusting, I can tell. It's a lot to take in, isn't it?" Lyra's dark eyes shifted toward her. "It's different. I don't understand how your species can thrive like this, without control, without logic." Dr. Hartfield chuckled, clearly used to this line of questioning. "Humans have always thrived on chaos, but that's also what makes us strong. We've learned to adapt not just to the world around us, but to one another. We depend on our relationships, our families, our bonds. It's in our nature to be social creatures." Lyra frowned, her brow furrowing as she processed the words. "But doesn't that weaken you? Isn't your survival in danger if you rely too much on emotions?" Dr. Hartfield smiled again, this time with a more knowing expression. "Not at all. It's what makes us resilient. It's not just about surviving, Lyra. It's about living fully, embracing the highs and lows of existence. It's about connection, understanding, and love. You'd be surprised how strong that can make you." Lyra's thoughts were a whirlwind. The humans were so messy. Their emotions, their relationships, it was all too much for her to comprehend. In the Valkar world, families were formed based on the ideal of genetic compatibility, without the messiness of love or affection. The idea of love itself seemed foreign, almost like a weakness. Yet, Lyra could not deny that there was something about the way humans interacted that seemed powerful. It wasn't just their genetic adaptability. It was the emotional bonds they formed. Her thoughts were interrupted when Dr. Hartfield led her into a large room where several human families were gathered. The scene was chaotic. Children running around, parents talking and laughing. Some families were celebrating the upcoming birth of a child, others simply enjoying the quiet company of one another. Lyra couldn't help but stare, unable to make sense of the sight before her. There was something beautiful in the way the humans interacted, but also something strange. They were so vulnerable, so open, yet it seemed like they were stronger for it. A couple caught her eye. The man was holding his pregnant partner, his hand gently resting on her stomach. They were talking quietly, smiling, completely lost in their own world. Lyra's gaze lingered on them longer than she intended. She had never seen anything like it, such a deep connection between two people. The emotion in their eyes as they spoke about their future child was overwhelming. It was so raw, so real, and so unlike the Valkar way of life. "Do you understand now?" Dr. Hartfield asked, breaking the silence. Lyra looked up at her, confused. "Understand what?" Dr. Hartfield gestured toward the couple. "This is what I mean. You see it now, don't you? The strength of human connections. It's not just about genetics, it's about love. The bond they share is what makes them strong." Lyra's mind raced. She had never considered love in such a context. The Valkar saw emotions as primitive, something to be controlled and eliminated in favor of pure logic. Yet here, on Earth, it was clear that these emotions were a driving force, shaping every aspect of human life. It wasn't just about survival, it was about living fully, embracing the challenges of existence together. "I see," Lyra murmured, her voice soft, but she wasn't sure if she understood. She felt a pang in her chest, a strange sensation she had never experienced before. It was almost like a longing, but for what she couldn't say. It confused her. Later that evening, as Lyra lay in her quarters, she replayed the images of the families in her mind. The love between them was undeniable, and it was beginning to affect her in ways she didn't expect. Her logical mind told her that this was irrational, that emotions were a weakness. But a part of her, something deep inside, felt drawn to it. She was unsure if it was the way humanity had evolved, or if it was something more. As the night grew darker, Lyra's thoughts shifted once more. She had come here to study human genetics, to understand their methods of survival and reproduction. But now, something was shifting inside her, something she hadn't planned for. It wasn't just about their genes anymore. It was about their hearts. And Lyra couldn't help but wonder, what was it about human emotions that made them so powerful? The days on Earth blurred together for Lyra. Each day was filled with new experiences, new observations, and new questions that seemed to grow deeper in her mind. The humans were so different from the Valkar, and yet she couldn't deny the strange pull she felt toward their way of life. She had always thought of herself as a logical, methodical creature, one who depended on science and precision. But the humans, with their emotional bonds, their unpredictable ways, and their complex relationships, had her questioning everything she had ever believed. One morning, Dr. Hartfield invited Lyra to visit one of Earth's most advanced fertility clinics, where humans utilized cutting-edge technology to control their genetic future. As they entered the building, Lyra was immediately struck by the sterile, clinical environment. Everything was white and clean, with machines buzzing softly in the background. It was a place of science, of genetic manipulation. Here, humans had learned to take control of their evolution, choosing the traits they wanted to pass on to future generations. "This is where human genetics truly shines," Dr. Hartfield explained, leading Lyra through the halls. "We can select for traits we want in our children, eliminate genetic diseases, and even enhance certain characteristics." Lyra nodded, her mind focused on the data she was being shown. This was what she had expected: control, precision, and planning. This was how the Valkar did things. She watched as a couple went through a series of tests, choosing the traits they wanted in their unborn child. Intelligence, strength, health. Lyra could see how powerful this technology was. The humans were mastering their genetics, making sure their offspring were healthy and strong, free from disease or weakness. But as she observed the process, something started to trouble her. The couple, while excited, seemed distant. Their connection wasn't the same as the family she had seen earlier, the ones with the pregnant woman and the man who had held her so tenderly. There was no real emotion here, no warmth or love. This was business, cold, and calculated. Lyra could see how this method of reproduction, while scientifically perfect, lacked the emotional depth that made humans who they were. Dr. Hartfield seemed to sense Lyra's confusion and smiled kindly. "I know what you're thinking," she said. "This is all very technical. But remember, Humans are still creatures of emotion. This process is just one way we try to ensure a better future, but it doesn't replace the love that comes with family. Lyra nodded, though her mind was still racing. But what about the other method? The natural way. The one without genetic enhancement. Dr. Hartfield's face softened as she led Lyra into another part of the clinic. You mean traditional reproduction. It's still very much a part of human life, especially in remote areas or among certain cultures. Some people prefer to let nature take its course. Lyra felt a twinge of curiosity. She had heard about this natural reproduction before, but had never truly understood it. To the Valkar, reproduction was a precise, controlled act. It was about genetics and survival, not about love or emotion. But humans seemed to do things differently. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important in this idea, something that her species had missed. Dr. Hartfield led Lyra to a room where a family was gathered. It was a small, humble space, and the parents were sitting together, holding hands. The woman, visibly pregnant, looked up at Lyra with a smile, her face glowing with the joy of carrying a child. Lyra felt a strange sensation in her chest, one she couldn't explain. The family seemed so real. There was no perfection in their genetics, no carefully selected traits. This child would not be engineered for success. It would be born with its own strengths and weaknesses, its own story to tell. Yet, despite the lack of genetic control, there was something deeply powerful in this moment. This is what you mean? Lyra asked quietly. Dr. Hartfield nodded. This is the heart of human reproduction. It's not just about the child or the genetics. It's about the bond between the parents, the love they have for one another, and the joy they feel at the thought of bringing a new life into the world. It's messy, imperfect, but it's real. Lyra stood silently, observing the family. The warmth between them was undeniable, and she found herself feeling a strange longing. It was as if a part of her was being awakened, a part she hadn't even known existed. The connection between the parents was not perfect, but it was powerful. The woman's smile, the man's gentle touch, the way they looked at each other with hope. It was all so different from the sterile, emotionless methods she had been taught to believe in. And it was in that moment that Lyra understood something crucial. The Valkar might have perfected the science of reproduction, but the humans had perfected something far more valuable. The ability to love, to connect, and to bring new life into the world, not just through genes, but through emotion. This was the true strength of humanity. Lyra felt a lump form in her throat as she realized she would never truly understand what it meant to be human. The emotional complexity of their relationships, the bond between parents and children, was something her species could never replicate. And for the first time, Lyra felt the sting of loss. She was no longer just a detached observer of human life. She was beginning to feel a deep, aching longing for something she could never have. The more she watched these families, the more she questioned everything she had ever known. There was more to life than just survival. There was something about the unpredictability of human emotions that made them stronger, something the Valkar would never understand. Lyra had never felt so lost. As the days passed, she found herself struggling to reconcile the conflicting emotions inside her. The more she observed humanity, their way of life, their love, their chaos, the more her carefully constructed worldview began to crack. Her species, the Valkar, prided itself on control and precision. They believed that emotions were a weakness, something to be suppressed and eliminated for the sake of efficiency. But here on Earth, emotions were not only accepted, they were celebrated. And for the first time in her life, Lyra was beginning to feel them. The clinic visit had been the tipping point. The sterile environment, where humans could manipulate their genes with cold precision, had felt so distant. But when she saw the family, the parents who had embraced the natural way of reproduction, something inside her shifted. She had been so focused on the science, so consumed with her studies of human genetics, that she had never allowed herself to understand the deeper emotional aspect of what made humanity unique. It wasn't just about survival. It wasn't just about creating perfect offspring or enhancing genetic traits. It was about love. It was about creating life through connection, through a bond that went beyond mere biology. And that idea, that connection, was something Lyra couldn't fully comprehend. As much as she admired humanity's strength, she was beginning to feel a deep sense of confusion and sorrow. She couldn't explain it, but it was as if something inside her had awakened that she couldn't control. That evening, as the sun set outside her quarters, Lyra sat by the window, staring out at the unfamiliar world she had been studying for weeks. Earth was a beautiful planet, full of life and wonder, but it was also a place full of raw emotion. And that rawness scared her. She had always prided herself on her logical mind, on her ability to distance herself from feelings. But now, with the images of the families and their bonds haunting her thoughts, she felt like she was drowning in a sea of emotions she didn't understand. She thought back to the family she had seen in the clinic, the joy and the love that seemed to radiate from them. The way the parents held each other, the way they spoke of their children with such tenderness. It was a stark contrast to the Valkar way. The Valkar bred for logic and efficiency. They formed partnerships based on genetic compatibility, and their children were created with the sole purpose of strengthening the species. There was no love, no emotional connection, just the cold, calculated science of reproduction. But here on Earth, it was different. Families were not just biological units, they were emotional units. They thrived not because they were genetically perfect, but because they cared for each other. The love between parents and children, the sacrifices they made for one another, was what made humans strong. It was what gave them the ability to face challenges that would break weaker species. Lyra felt a deep pang of regret, a feeling she had never experienced before. She had always believed that her species was superior, that their way of life, their way of reproduction, was the right way. But now, as she sat there alone, she realized that there was something profoundly missing in the Valkar way. Something that humanity had that her species could never replicate. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at her door. Lyra stood up, her heart racing, unsure of who it might be. She had not interacted with many humans outside of her professional meetings, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to face them. But when she opened the door, it was Dr. Hartfield. "You've been quiet lately," Dr. Hartfield said gently, stepping inside. "Is everything all right, Lyra?" Lyra hesitated, unsure of how to explain the turmoil inside her. She had never been one to open up about her feelings. Emotions had always been something to suppress, to hide. But standing there, looking at Dr. Hartfield, Lyra felt a sudden need to speak, to let her guard down, even if just for a moment. "I don't understand," Lyra said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been studying humans, their genetics, their way of life. I've seen how you survive, how you thrive, and I thought I understood it all. But now I see something else. Something that's not about genetics, not about survival. It's about something deeper, something that I don't know how to feel." Dr. Hartfield looked at her with a mix of sympathy and understanding. "You mean love," she said quietly. Lyra's eyes widened in surprise. "Love." The word felt foreign on her tongue. "I don't understand it. I can't." Dr. Hartfield nodded slowly. "It's not something you can understand with just your mind, Lyra. Love isn't something that can be calculated or controlled. It's something you feel. And it's okay if you don't understand it right now. But I want you to know, it's what makes humans unique. It's what gives us strength. Without it, we wouldn't be who we are." Lyra stared at her, her mind spinning. She had always believed that her species had perfected everything. Science, genetics, life. But now, here she was, facing something she couldn't even begin to understand. She had spent her whole life thinking that emotions were weaknesses, yet she was starting to realize that it was those very emotions that made humanity strong. She felt a deep ache in her chest, a longing for something she couldn't explain. "I don't know if I can ever truly understand," Lyra whispered, her voice full of uncertainty. "But I want to try." Dr. Hartfield smiled warmly. "You don't have to understand it all at once. Sometimes, understanding comes when we stop trying to control it and just let ourselves feel." As Dr. Hartfield left, Lyra stood alone, her thoughts swirling in a storm of confusion. She had come to Earth to study human genetics, but now she was beginning to understand something far more important. It wasn't just about survival. It was about the love and connection that made humanity strong. And as she looked out at the stars, Lyra felt a deep longing for something she could never have. Days turned into weeks, and Lyra found herself increasingly drawn into the complexity of human life. What had started as a simple scientific mission had transformed into something much deeper. She had always been a student of logic, of structure, of the cold science of survival. But now, as she lived among humans, she was slowly beginning to realize that survival was only part of what made their species thrive. She spent more time with Dr. Hartfield, who continued to explain human relationships to her, though Lyra wasn't sure she fully understood. She had been taught that emotions were weaknesses, that they distracted from purpose and efficiency. Yet every time she saw a human family or observed a couple, she saw a strength in their bonds, a power in their vulnerability. The way they shared their love so openly, the way they cared for one another. It made Lyra feel something stir inside her, something she couldn't control. One afternoon, Dr. Hartfield invited Lyra to attend a family gathering. It wasn't an official scientific event, but more of a personal meeting with one of Hartfield's colleagues. Lyra wasn't sure what to expect, but she agreed. As they entered the small home, Lyra was immediately struck by the warmth. The space was cozy, with soft lighting and the scent of cooking food filling the air. She had never seen anything like it. The Valkar, in all their precision and order, would never host such a gathering. Everything in their lives was structured, from the moment of birth to the moment of death. There was no room for such spontaneous gatherings. But here, everything felt different. Human life was messy, unpredictable, but somehow, it worked. The family that greeted them was warm and welcoming, their faces alight with smiles. There were children running around, playing with toys, their laughter filling the room. Lyra watched the parents interact with their kids with a tenderness she had never seen before. The father lifted one of the young children into his arms and spun her around, making her laugh even louder. The mother smiled softly, watching them with adoration in her eyes. Lyra's heart tightened. There was something about their joy that felt so real, so raw. It was as if they were living for each other, their hearts intertwined in a way Lyra had never experienced. As they all sat down to eat, Dr. Hartfield noticed Lyra's quiet observation. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she asked, her voice soft. Lyra looked up, her brow furrowing slightly. "I don't understand it. There's no logic in it, no structure. It's just love. How can you live like this?" Dr. Hartfield smiled gently, her gaze warm. "Humans don't need to control everything, Lyra. Sometimes, the most important things in life are the things you can't control. Love, connection, family. They're not things you can plan or predict, but they're what give life meaning." Lyra felt a strange feeling in her chest again. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was unfamiliar. She couldn't explain it. She had always believed that logic was the only true guide, that science could solve everything. But here, among these humans, she was beginning to question everything she thought she knew. Later that evening, after the family had gathered around the fireplace to share stories, Lyra felt a pull to join them. She had never been the type to engage in such casual interactions, but something about the warmth and openness of these people made her want to be a part of it. As she approached, the children began to ask her questions about her species, their curiosity piqued by her strange appearance and alien origin. Lyra hesitated, unsure of how to respond, but then she felt a little hand tugging at her sleeve. One of the children, a girl of about 6, looked up at her with wide eyes. "Are you really from the stars?" the girl asked, her voice full of wonder. Lyra's lips twitched into a soft smile. "Yes, I am," she said quietly, feeling a strange warmth as the child's gaze remained fixed on her. The girl's innocence, her belief in the impossible, reminded Lyra of something she had long forgotten. The beauty of simple, untainted wonder. The child grinned, her face lighting up. "That's so cool. Do you have spaceships?" Lyra nodded, the unfamiliar feeling of happiness settling in her chest. "Yes, I do. We travel in ships that fly faster than you can imagine." The girl's eyes grew wide with excitement. "Can I see your spaceship someday?" Lyra paused, caught off guard by the child's question. She had never thought about Earth as a place where she would want to stay. Her mission was to study, to learn, and then to return home. But now, with this little girl looking up at her with such hope, something inside her shifted. "I'm not sure," she said softly, "but maybe, one day, you'll come visit the stars." The girl's smile grew even brighter. "I'll come visit you in the stars. I'll be an astronaut." Lyra's heart fluttered as she watched the child scamper off to tell her parents about the new friend from the stars. She sat back, her mind spinning. She had always believed that the universe was a cold and indifferent place, where only the fittest survived. But now, with this moment of simple connection, she was beginning to see a different truth. The universe was vast, yes, but it was also full of possibilities. Possibilities that she had never allowed herself to consider. Dr. Hartfield watched her, noticing the change in Lyra's expression. "What are you thinking, Lyra?" Lyra glanced at her, the realization settling in. "I think I'm starting to understand what makes humanity so strong. It's not just your genes or your technology. It's the way you care for each other, the way you live with love and connection. It's beautiful." Dr. Hartfield smiled, her eyes filled with understanding. "You've got it, Lyra. That's the heart of it." And for the first time since arriving on Earth, Lyra felt a deep sense of peace, as if she had finally begun to understand something that went beyond science, something that went straight to the heart. Lyra sat alone in her quarters late that night, staring out the window at the bright stars above. The vastness of the universe stretched out before her, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, she felt small. She had spent her entire life believing that knowledge, logic, and science were the answers to everything. But now, after her time with humans, she was starting to understand that there was more to life than just what could be measured or explained. The warmth of the family's gathering, the laughter of the children, the love shared between the parents, these things had begun to shift something inside her. She had never felt such a deep longing for connection, for understanding. Her whole life, she had been taught to value only what could be controlled, but now, it was the chaos of human emotion that seemed to hold the greatest power. She thought back to the child who had asked about her spaceship, to the innocence and wonder in her eyes. The girl had believed, wholeheartedly, that she could someday visit the stars. That kind of faith, that ability to believe in something bigger than herself, was something Lyra had never understood. To the Valkar, there was no room for such dreams. They were taught to focus on the facts, the truths that could be proven. But these humans, they embraced the unknown. They lived with hope, with love, with the belief that anything was possible. It was a mindset that confused her, but also fascinated her. As she sat, lost in thought, there was a knock at her door. Lyra stood, her heart beating faster. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened it, she was surprised to find Dr. Hartfield standing there, looking as calm and collected as ever. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. Lyra nodded, stepping aside to let her enter. Dr. Hartfield walked in and sat down, her expression unreadable. "I've been thinking about our conversation earlier," Lyra said, her voice hesitant. "About what you said, about love. I think I'm starting to understand it, but there's still something I don't get." Dr. Hartfield smiled softly, as if she had been expecting this moment. "Go ahead," she said, leaning forward. What don't you understand? Lyra took a deep breath, trying to put her feelings into words. It's not that I don't see the value in love, she said slowly. It's that I don't understand how it can be so powerful. I've seen the way humans care for one another, and I've seen how you take risks for each other. But it feels unpredictable. It feels like something you can't control. And that's terrifying. How do you survive when you give so much of yourself away? Dr. Hartfield regarded her with understanding. I won't lie to you, Lyra. Loving others is risky. It makes you vulnerable. But at the same time, it's what makes life worth living. Without love, humans wouldn't have the strength to face the hardships of the world. Without connection, we'd be alone. And loneliness is the greatest enemy of all. Lyra sat quietly, absorbing her words. She had never thought about it that way. To her, loneliness had always been something to avoid, something to be solved with logic and planning. But Dr. Hartfield was speaking of something deeper, something that couldn't be fixed by a solution, but by the willingness to be open, to trust, and to give. But how do you know if it's worth it? Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How do you know if love will bring you joy or pain? Dr. Hartfield paused, her eyes thoughtful. You don't always know. Sometimes you take a risk, and sometimes it works out. Sometimes it doesn't. But the important thing is that you try. Because even if it brings pain, love gives us something we can't find anywhere else. It connects us to other people, and through that connection, we find strength. Lyra felt a pang of something deep inside her. It was a feeling she had never experienced before. It was as if something long buried was slowly coming to the surface. She had always believed that strength came from control, from distance, from independence. But now she was beginning to see that strength could also come from allowing yourself to be vulnerable, from opening your heart to others. I've never allowed myself to feel love, Lyra admitted quietly. I'd always kept myself separate, focused on my mission. But now, I'm not sure I can ignore it anymore. Dr. Hartfield's expression softened, and she reached out, placing a hand gently on Lyra's. You don't have to ignore it, Lyra. You're not alone in this. It's okay to feel. It's okay to let yourself experience the full range of emotions that come with being human. Lyra looked down at their hands, her mind racing. The Valkar had never experienced love the way humans did. They had never known the kind of bond that could heal, could empower, could lift them in the darkest moments. And yet, Lyra felt a deep longing for that connection. She wanted to understand it. She wanted to feel it. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt as though she were standing at the edge of something important. She had spent so much time analyzing, measuring, and controlling everything around her. But now, in this moment, she realized that maybe the most important thing she could learn wasn't about controlling the universe, but about letting the universe, and the people in it, change her. Maybe, Lyra began, her voice trailing off. Maybe I'll start by letting myself feel. Maybe that's the only way I'll truly understand. Dr. Hartfield smiled, her eyes warm with pride. That's a start, Lyra. It's a big start. As Lyra watched her leave, she felt something she hadn't expected, hope. Hope that there was more to life than just survival. That maybe, just maybe, she could find a new strength through the very thing that had once seemed so terrifying. Love. The weeks following her conversation with Dr. Hartfield were the most challenging and eye-opening for Lyra. For the first time in her life, she found herself torn between two worlds. She had always been a creature of logic, focused on science, precision, and control. But now, as she spent more time with the humans, she felt herself changing. The emotions she had tried so hard to suppress were slowly coming to the surface, and she didn't know how to handle them. She couldn't explain what was happening to her, but she knew that she was no longer the person who had arrived on Earth. One afternoon, as she walked through the bustling streets of the city, Lyra found herself reflecting on everything she had learned. She watched as humans passed by, their faces filled with purpose, with joy, with pain. There was something so raw about them, something she couldn't ignore. The Valkar had never experienced emotions in this way. They were a species built on logic, efficiency, and control. They bred for perfection, for the survival of their kind. But now, Lyra was beginning to see that there was something far more powerful than perfection. There was the messy, unpredictable beauty of being human. She had witnessed human families, couples, and friendships, and she had seen the power of their connections. It wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always perfect, but there was a kind of strength that came from the vulnerability of loving and caring for one another. Lyra had never understood it before, but now she saw that this strength was the foundation of humanity's survival. It wasn't just about physical strength or genetic superiority. It was about emotional resilience. It was about the ability to feel, to risk, to hope, even when everything seemed uncertain. As Lyra walked, her thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. She turned to see Dr. Hartfield approaching, her expression warm but serious. "Lyra," she said softly, "I've been thinking about something. I know you've been struggling with the idea of love and connection, but I think it's time for you to make a decision. You've spent so much time analyzing everything, but now it's time for you to act. You've seen what humans are capable of, what they can do when they love. It's up to you now to decide if you want to experience that for yourself." Lyra's heart raced at the challenge in Dr. Hartfield's words. She had seen the truth of what Dr. Hartfield was saying, but she had been afraid to embrace it. She had spent so many years avoiding emotions, avoiding the messiness of human life, because it felt like a weakness. But now, it didn't feel like a weakness anymore. It felt like a source of strength. "I'm not sure if I'm ready," Lyra said, her voice uncertain. "I've never known love. I've never known what it feels like to give myself to someone else. I've always kept myself apart." Dr. Hartfield smiled, her gaze filled with compassion. "You don't have to be ready, Lyra. No one ever is. But if you don't take the risk, you'll never understand. And sometimes it's the things we're most afraid of that bring us the greatest rewards." Lyra looked at Dr. Hartfield, her mind swirling with confusion and fear. But deep inside, she felt a pull, a quiet, steady urge to open her heart, to experience what it meant to be truly human. She had spent so long trying to stay detached, to stay in control. But now she realized that control wasn't the answer. Love, connection, vulnerability, that was the answer. "I think I'm ready," Lyra said, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "I think I want to try. I want to experience what it means to be human." Dr. Hartfield's face lit up with a proud smile. "That's all anyone can do, Lyra. Take it one step at a time. You're not alone in this." The next day, Lyra found herself back at the family's home, the one where she had first witnessed the power of love and connection. This time, she wasn't just an observer. She was part of the gathering. She smiled as the children ran around, their laughter filling the room. She could feel the warmth of the family's presence, the way they cared for one another. For the first time, she felt like she belonged. As she sat down at the dinner table, one of the children looked up at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "You're smiling," the child exclaimed, eyes wide with surprise. Lyra chuckled softly. "I guess I am." The child beamed. "That's good. You should smile more." Lyra smiled again, the simple gesture making her heart feel lighter. For the first time, she realized that it wasn't about understanding everything. It was about letting go, embracing the unpredictability of life, and finding strength in connection. As the evening wore on, Lyra found herself laughing, sharing stories with the family, and feeling the warmth she had never known before. She realized that, in this moment, she was experiencing something that no amount of science or logic could ever explain. She was experiencing love, raw, unfiltered, and beautiful. Later, as she stood outside, gazing up at the stars once more, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The universe was vast, and her place in it was still uncertain. But for the first time in her life, She felt ready to embrace whatever came next. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had learned that love was not a weakness. It was the strongest force in the universe. And as she looked out at the stars, she whispered to herself, maybe, just maybe, this is the beginning of something beautiful.